The acts of 2023, this meeting will be conducted in person and as a courtesy via remote means in accordance with applicable law. Please note that while an option for remote attendance and or participation is being provided as a courtesy to the public and board members, the meeting hearing will not be suspended or terminated if tech problems interrupt the virtual broadcast unless required by law. Visitors can visit www.pactv.org/Duxbury to watch a video of this meeting on demand. Boom. Mayor?
All
Did
set.
it.
All right. So our first order of business is to review fiscal 24 end of year transfers. As you all know, the Mass General Law allows us to do end of year transfers where we are allowed to move appropriations from departments who have a surplus to departments who have deficits for a variety of reasons. This is the second set of transfers that I'm presenting to the Finance Committee for your review and approval. I believe everybody has a chart. For those that are connected remotely, I did email the chart out about an hour ago, and hopefully you have it in front of you. The sum total this evening that we're going to be talking about is $336,962. So if I can walk through at a high level what we're looking at here. The top section are the funding sources where there are available surpluses. So we are moving money from these line items into the section below. What you'll note is the funding sources that are available where there are surpluses. The majority of them are from a number of departments who have either had vacancies, so staffing positions that we have been unsuccessful in filling, or where we've had vacancies temporarily during the year. So somebody left and it took us a little while to fill that position. So it's a temporary vacancy. And in some cases, when we did fill that position, we filled it at a lower salary level. So there were salary savings. So that's the bulk of the surpluses that are available. There were some departments you'll note, for example, the pool was actually shut down for about 6 weeks for us to do a capital repair. We had drained the pool, had to do some tiling and some repair work in the pool. So while that was shut down, we did not have lifeguards on staff, so there was a savings there. There were periodic shutdowns at the beach where lifeguards were not being utilized, mostly due to rain. And so when it's raining out and nobody's at the beach, we don't need lifeguards to man an empty beach. So we've had some cost savings there. So if I move down to the section where we need to utilize the funding, a number of instances, we had some vendor price increases that occurred unbeknownst to us after the FY24 budget was set. Treasurer's office, for example, had a significant vendor price increase with City Hall systems. The cost of the fulfillment for the beach stickers doubled. So when we put our budget together, we were not anticipating that that price increase would actually double. The vendor has done that sort of deliberately because they would like us to utilize a different method of issuing those stickers. Right now, what happens is the sticker that we use has an RFID tag in it, and they have to hand process every single one of them in order to write the license plate number on them. And they would prefer not to do that. They would prefer us to use a different sticker and automate the process. So we will be looking at that for next year and trying to streamline the process in order to bring those costs down. But those are some of the types of things that we encountered during FY24 with these price increases.
Did we budget for 25 appropriately?
We believe so. Assuming that the vendor doesn't double it again.
Well, no, but I mean, including what they did for us for 24, was it?
We did adjust
Okay.
the treasurer's budget. There were also some additional printing increases that we didn't anticipate, some additional materials that office needed to print and distribute. So there was some cost overruns there. Under legal services, we're looking to apply or move $41,200 to legal services. We have some ongoing active litigation that is costing us additional monies that were not necessarily anticipated. So we need to cover the deficit that exists in the legal services budget.
Is it possible for us to understand what the cases are? I know that we're not going to get involved in the details.
I'll get into the details, but I will tell you that we have 3 active cases from a party named Husk. that is
Oh,
suing the town.
CJ?
I don't know CJ,
Oh, CJ, so pig farm.
apparently.
Yeah.
So that's covered,
Oh, he's really not making.
a fair amount,
sense.
yeah, which is, so it is what it is. So facilities, we're looking at moving about $22,000 into facilities. There's a couple of departments, where we've had some situations where we've had a lot of turnover, with department heads and, during that transition, there are times where costs have been incurred and we're not entirely sure we've got our arms around them at year end as we're transitioning from one department head to another. So we've worked very closely with our new facilities director to try to get a handle on all of the orders that had been placed during that interim period. And we believe we have a good handle on it, but in some cases, what I'm doing is I'm moving funds into some of these line items as a pre-measure, so that we don't have any year-end surprises as we start to gather those invoices.
Mary,
Yes, ma'am.
I know that when, before Christina left, and when she was presenting her budget for 2025, that there was a lot of facilities cost at the school. Is that reflected in this number?
Nope, these are only town
Town
expenses,
only.
so we have separated and isolated those. These are strictly for town.
We do-
I will tell you, and I'll say it again, and I've said it several times before, the facilities department budget is chronically underfunded.
Right.
It is inadequate.
For
to-
25 as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we did that.
We knew
I
that.
did that.
And we also knew that we were trying to get a plan together to do the actual review of the buildings and the inventorying the buildings and trying to understand the prioritization of said
And
inventory.
I don't disagree with that plan per se. However, what that would generally yield is a high level review of the buildings, their envelopes and their mechanical systems. And end up resulting in some capital improvements in future years. But we're talking day to day.
Yeah, I'm talking maintenance.
If we don't have the data to know, if the department head hasn't provided the data and said, hey, I'm underfunded, and this is the experience for the last 3 years, you and I, we talk about this all the
Work order
time.
system. There is a work order system, I believe, that can be, the tickets are issued to the,
No, I'm not saying there isn't a system, I'm just saying we don't have the data to
we
increase
could
it.
possibly get the data from the work order system is where.
Okay, I can tell you just intrinsically in my 1 year here, from day one, I knew that department was chronically underfunded. What we have done during the course of FY 24, and I've listed here for you, if you look at the facilities line, FY 23,
Yeah,
our
I saw
property
that.
repairs and maintenance, it was budgeted at 185,000. FY 24, it went up to 223. For FY 25, we're at 265, so we've increased it slightly, but it's still
Not enough.
it's inadequate. For FY 24, what we did is we utilized $150,000 of ARPA funding for general facilities. So we, in essence, applied an additional $150,000 to that line item. All of those funds have been fully expended.
So do we have a facilities manager now?
We do. She joined, Katie is wonderful, and she joined us a few weeks ago, and she is absolutely getting her arms around the situation.
Is she coming to work on Monday or?
She is, yes, we're working very closely with her. And at year end, it is certainly a balancing act, and she's doing a great job, but I'm going to continue to highlight to you and to the select board, and to the community that area of our operation
It
is
continues to be a vulnerability for us.
Huge,
extraordinary.
yeah. And we're aware of it, but we can't fix it and you can't fix it unless
Until we
we
figure out.
have our arms around the number that they actually need.
But I agree, there's a
Yeah.
balancing act to the actual analysis of what we're trying to do tactically as opposed to what we're trying to do in a capital plan. Right, and maybe.
Yeah, it's different.
It's different.
Exactly. Fire department, one of our large deficits has occurred with respect to fire department overtime. There have just been an increase in call volumes that have resulted in recalls, so their overtime line is in a deficit. We've had a couple of vacancies, some firefighters who've left our department, gone to another community, and we've had to, while we're placing those positions, fill those shifts with overtime. When we have recall situations, those are paid at overtime rates. So we've had a lot of that activity. So what the fire chief did is, and he manages his budget very closely, Last several weeks, about last month of the year, he has restricted all spending in the expenditure lines in order to be able to save funding in his expenses to cover his overtime deficit. So you'll see that reflected here as one of the surpluses from fire salaries to cover fire, from fire expenses to cover fire overtime. We continue to have, I'll draw your attention to the sewer department. I'm moving $95,000 over to the sewer department. That line item, that department has sort of been an extraordinary anomaly this year. We have encountered numerous situations, not the least of which is the emergency management interim services to run our wastewater treatment facility. We've talked about this before because I've come before you. We continue to have the need to employ a third-party consultant to provide the licensed credentialed services that are required by Mass DEP to run that treatment facility. And it's costing us an extraordinary amount of money. And so even with this 95,000, we're still going to be looking at that line item and trying to understand if we're going to slide into home base successfully. So I may or may not have to come back before you before the 15th of July. I'm hoping that I don't.
So is it because we can't find somebody? Or because of the pay scale doesn't allow us to find somebody?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
Where is the wastewater?
It's
behind the high school.
behind the high school, behind the fields.
Everybody thinks it's a building where they store the football pads. It's not.
The address is off Lover's Lane.
Okay,
Yeah, exactly. Then with the beach, so the beach is another area where we need to cover salary line items. So the beach has incurred significant expense with respect to staffing because of a lot of the closures. And so one would think that if there are closures on the OSV portion of the beach, that we wouldn't need to patrol it, but that is exactly the opposite of what happens. We actually need to apply more staff out there in order to manage the restrictions. And so there is a significant overrun with respect to staffing at the beach. And then there is, so under DPW administration, we've had some transition in that department, both at the management level and as well as at the clerical level. And so what I'm doing there is preemptively moving some funding in there just to make sure that during these transition periods that we have not lost sight of items that may have been ordered and are not, and we need to be prepared to pay those invoices.
Do you do a percentage, Mary, or you just kind of know what's kind of out there?
It's a ballpark
Okay.
estimate based on what we think. We've gone through the bigger invoices that we expected, but we want to make sure that we're prepared to deal with any other small issues.
So you put a bogey out there to pick it up, okay?
You
And
got it.
how's the staffing there? Are we still?
So we've had, about 10 days ago, we had yet another transition in that department, but we were able amazingly to quickly fill that position.
Good.
But we do have somebody who's out on leave, so that there are, 2 clerical positions in that department. One has been recently filled, that person is in training and onboarding, and then the second position in that office, person is out on leave, so we're working through that. And then the last item is Medicare. Interestingly enough, Medicare for FY24 was actually funded at a lower level than FY23. I have no idea why that happened. If our salaries are going up, our Medicare expenses are going to be going up. And so what we're seeing is a deficit in that line item right now for
That is-
FY24.
That's a mistake.
That was clearly a budgetary mistake from 18 months ago or whenever, or 2 years ago when the budget was put together. And so we're addressing it
But
now.
I don't remember, does anybody remember Medicare going down?
No.
No.
Well, it traditionally does not.
No,
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 but we
but
budgeted for it, but that would have been glaring.
Yeah, it would have left up.
I'm giving you the numbers right there.
No, I believe you. I'm just annoyed at myself that we didn't catch it.
Right, and so I've given you the FY25 number to show that we've
Well,
adequately increased that.
the variance wouldn't have been that great
Oh,
considering that.
I can tell you exactly what it was. They took actuals and we had so many vacancies in 23 because we had 12 people out of DPW. We had a ton of people that were gone.
So the salaries were,
So the salary, so when they
Collecting
did,
it.
so when the actual was calculated, it was based on all those vacancies. That's
Yeah.
exactly what happened.
So those are all of your transfers in a nutshell. Are there?
Quick question on the Medicare. Where
Yes,
is
sir.
that? Who generates that number, Mary? Does it come from the county, from the town, or where's it coming from?
From a budgetary perspective, Al?
Not from a budgetary, but what's the source of the actual number? Where do you get it from?
So that would come from the finance department from payroll.
From
And it's,
payroll.
1.45% of wages paid.
Okay. That's the question I was asking.
Oh, okay, yes, Medicare rate is 1.45% that is employer paid.
Okay, great.
And the employee pays 1.45 and we pay 1.45.
Thank you.
Sure.
So that's gonna happen anytime you have a lot of vacancies or you've got a lot of transition.
Well,
It shouldn't,
Medicare,
but it does.
Medicare needs to continue to increase as wages increase. So,
Right.
and we know that we are a service-driven industry, and our personal services continue to increase, and that line item needs to grow at the same pace.
I'm not debating it. I'm just saying if we had so many vacancies and so many people leave, that's why it went down. They just took. the
Perhaps
actual-
I wasn't here when that number was.
No,
so yeah.
well, I'm telling you, like, it's the only way that could have happened is they did an actual instead of the positions.
Potentially, yeah. Yeah.
So do we want to do this all at once?
Yes, so I'm asking for the committee, if I'm happy to answer any specific questions, but in terms of a motion, it would be one motion to approve the transfers as listed in that amount.
Okay, is everybody ready to do it? Ready to do it on the phone?
Anybody on Zoom have any other questions?
I have a question after we take the motion and vote on it, if I might.
Move to approve of fiscal year 24 end of year transfers in the amount of $336,962.
Second.
Lie.
Ooh, ouch. So all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All those
Aye.
opposed? Okay, and all those opposed? Okay,
So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
we have a good showing here.
The gang's all here.
Gang's all here.
Excellent.
Betsy, may I
Yeah.
ask a question at this point?
Please do.
All right, thank you. In typical fashion, Mary's done a masterful job on essentially taking these excesses and covering our expenses to the dollar and the cent. My question really is maybe a hypothetical, but will we be facing diminishing availability as we go forward to next year's budget or the upcoming budget? My concern is about the size of this cushion. I would love to think that we're going to have that kind of flexibility in the future, but I just want to get some of Mary's impressions on how she sees this kind of surplus going forward to, if we project ourselves to June of 2025.
So let me paraphrase there, Al. Are you nervous that we have the money this year to do this, but that we won't have it next year if we
Yeah,
have
that's
some shortfalls?
that's it in a nutshell, Betsy. That's exactly right. I'm just kind of
Okay.
concerned about, we've got this now. Mary does a terrific job, but the resources at her beck and call are, what's left in those line items. And I'm just trying to get a feel for what the future may hold.
So if I may.
Yes.
That's a very fair question, Al. I will tell you that this year seems to be unusual. I've taken a look at prior years' history, and we don't seem to have transfers of this magnitude in previous years. We've been fortunate and unfortunate this year to have this flexibility, because if you recall from a few moments ago, I said the bulk of the funding that has been made available is because we have incurred a large number of vacancies across our departments, and that surplus salary has been what is being utilized for these transfers. We hope that we don't continue to have these vacancies. We hope that we are able to fill those positions so that those folks can provide the services that we need to provide to the community. Going forward, we know that our budgets are getting tighter and tighter and tighter. So I am anticipating that we will not have this kind of flexibility next year, assuming that we are able to, staff to a greater extent than we were able to this year. We will always have vacancies in various departments where those situations will occur. But in terms of our expense lines, and as I look at the departments and their expense budgets, they are already very, very lean. You will note that I am not bringing a lot of expense transfers in front of you because there simply isn't a surplus available in the expense lines for our departments. Am I concerned about it going forward? Sure. I'm concerned about a lot of things. And as we get tighter and tighter, it will become more challenging and more difficult to be able to accommodate these deficits. And our only recourse at that point, should we not have appropriations available to handle these types of year-end transfers, what would be required is any deficits that remain in departments that we're unable to cover. Those deficits will then go on the next year's tax recap, and we will have to cover those deficits right off the top from our next year's budget.
So,
And even worse than that, if we have a shortfall, if we have a deficit in these lines that we can't cover, then the Department of Revenue comes in and murders us.
Not necessarily. The recourse is that any deficit that remains in a department after we finish this process, any deficit that remains, I'm required to raise that on the recap. So if we don't have excess levy capacity to cover that deficit that's being raised on next year's recap, then what we'd have to do is look at our budget and make cuts to raise that deficit first. It's the first thing that has to happen.
so which of these numbers is the real, is this a real deficit or a real surplus?
So it's a net zero.
Yeah, I know, but that's highly unlikely that you just had enough of a surplus to cover exactly the amount that we had to transfer.
So I think where you're going with it, I have a couple of other line items in the budget that do have surpluses right now.
Okay,
They're not
so there's more of a surplus. It's not like we had more of a deficit that we're not covering.
That is correct.
Okay.
We do not
So
have a
there's more of
structural
a surplus.
deficit rate. That is correct.
Different discussion, I think, entirely.
That would absolutely be a different conversation. No, there are still some additional surpluses. And that, just to sort of, go down the road a little bit further with that, those additional surpluses that exist in other lines that we're not talking about here tonight, what happens with those is those close out at the end of the year, and that's part of what generates free cash. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Sure. All right. So we're all set with that. We've got a vote. We're ready to go. Would you mind handing that?
We did vote.
Madam Chairperson, I need an original signature on that. Fantastic. All right.
What is SBTF again? I forgot.
Yeah, we're gonna move right on to that. I'm getting there.
acronym
So the next item on the agenda, we do not have any reserve fund transfers to go through this evening, which is good because there's only about $8,000 left in the reserve fund. We took advantage of that this year. So under announcements, I was asked to give an update for the Sustainable Budget Task Force,
Oh, thank you. Okay.
which is
She's believing.
SBTF.
It's SBTF. Okay.
Saves me from typing that out. As you may recall, our town manager back in April formed a 9-member committee called the Sustainable Budget Task Force. And the group has been meeting on a regular basis. I think we've had about 6 or 7 meetings to date. And the charge of that committee is to analyze both our revenue sources, our funding sources for our budget, as well as our expenses, and try and put together a 5-year forecast that utilizes sustainable revenues in order to fund our operations. So if we take a step back and we think about when we went through the exercise of putting together the FY25 budget, we all knew at the time that we had completed that budget creation and brought it forward to town meeting that was a very tight budget and that we had utilized almost all of our excess levy capacity, which means that going forward, our financial flexibility is very limited to grow our operation or to fund our operation. So our town manager put together this task force to take a deep dive into our revenue sources and see if there are any opportunities for us to maximize those revenue sources, whether it is looking at our fees and having increasing fees, looking at the way we do business and trying to find some efficiencies, looking at our expense budgets, which, as I have mentioned, are already very, very lean. You guys have done a very good job over the last several years of really budgeting to the penny. So we have completed our review essentially of all of our revenue sources. We've looked at our tax levy, our state aid, all of our local receipts, our bigger receipts that we generate here at the local level, as well as some other additional funding sources. We completed last week's meeting with a review from the school department of all of their other available funding sources, their revolving funds, their grants, and other sources that are used to support their operation. And although there are other funding sources made available to the school on the order of magnitude, it's not as perhaps large as some people may think. And the school department does use those funds very strategically to address some of their operational needs as well as their capital needs. So we've looked at all of those to see if there are any other areas that we can draw from in order to support our budget. And it's, I will tell you, very, very limited. One thing that we did do that we spent a fair amount of time doing is we brought in the assessor, the building commissioner, as well as our interim town planner to talk about our tax base and to talk about any potential development opportunities or expansion opportunities within our existing tax base. In doing that, we looked at the number of vacant and developable properties that the town has available, and what developments or plans may be in front of the planning board in terms of bringing on new growth. So new growth is any new subdivisions or new homes or additions or renovations to homes that come onto the tax rolls for the very first time. That helps to grow that Prop 2.5% and helps to grow our budget. So we took a good long look at a number of those opportunities. There are some that we will talk about, but there's a limit to that. One thing that did come up during our discussion and during my work with the town planner is we're talking about build out and how close to build out are we getting based on what's available for developable land. And the planner had informed me that the town of Duxbury has not done a full build out plan in a very, very long time. So one of the things that we'll be talking about over the course of the next year and a half or so is we'll be putting together a capital request for one-time expense to potentially look at a build out plan and see what's viable. But what we did find, and I think Betsy alluded to it earlier when we got here, is we debated and we brainstormed, I should say, on a variety of potential opportunities. And what we found time and time again is that we are hamstrung by our zoning
Culture.
by our zoning.
It's our zoning.
And our zoning
Mhm.
drives, our culture, I should say, drives our zoning. And so
build out
there's,
plan.
exactly. So there are inherent limitations that this community has thoughtfully and deliberately chosen to do over the years. And I guess we're at a point in time where we need to ask ourselves whether that continues to make sense. And if it does, there are consequences to that in terms of our ability to fund our operations. So.
I just had a question about, you mentioned grants on the school side. We do know that our public safety receives a number of grants from the state, especially around the rock and other departments. Is that the same kind of a situation with public schools where they're really directed very specifically at certain functions or certain services or?
It's are all very focused.
Yeah,
Therefore, another a math teacher, therefore a free lunch, therefore.
I'm just wondering how much is funding the technology spend over at the Rock? And is it,
Oh,
yeah, if it's,
okay, so the Rock is about 2/3 funded by grants.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And they're heavily dependent on grants. They honestly would not exist without them.
right.
And those grants are targeted for specific purposes. The primary grant that they receive, which is about $1.8 million, is their development grant. That development grant is what covers the bulk of their technology.
Right.
And then they also receive a very large support and incentive grant, and that covers covers some of the cost of the dispatchers who are manning that facility. They also receive training grants because every single employee of that operation is required to attend ongoing training. And that we get a training grant to support that.
It's always been on my watch list,
Mhm.
areas of vulnerability for us. Because simply from the fact that it's funded through grant, and even though the state has been very generous, and it's the 911, and I do understand that. But it seems, because of the source being a grant, is that, could the political winds change and?
No, so inherent in your question, I will tell you that I have the least concern about the risk of those ROC grants for a couple of reasons. Number one, the funding source for those ROC grants is not the state budget. The funding source is a fee that every
Everybody
single
pays, yeah.
person pays on their cell phone bill.
Yeah, the 911.
Exactly. And so there is an ongoing funding source that's available that continues to grow. Secondly, the state has a very strong level of support for regional dispatch facilities. And those come at a priority over independent local
And that's specifically
facilities.
what I'm saying, if there was a political change to
Yeah.
that, or moving away from a regional construct. We're
I
fine with
think
that.
we have the least amount of risk there.
I think
Okay,
if we're gonna worry, that wouldn't be the one that keeps me up.
Not at all.
There's other ones that make me wanna cry. Inside.
So our task force is going to meet again next week, and we are going to kick off looking at the expenditure side of our budget and start to build out the financial forecast for the expenditure side. The goal is to have this completed by the middle of August so that a formal report can be presented to the select board. With that being said, we've already provided one interim update to the select board, which was done on June 3rd. If you did not see that, there's a PAC TV recording of the select board meeting. You can go ahead and take a look at that. Our next update is scheduled to be delivered to the select board on July 8th. So next week, I will be presenting another slide deck to the select board, talking about in a little bit more detail what we just talked about this evening with respect to revenues. Okay,
Thank you.
sure.
I mean, participating is, I'm fascinated by it, but it's not a grisly message, but it's not happy. I mean, it's not that there aren't solutions, it's just there aren't solutions available to us. Based on zoning, based on culture, based on, all the choices that we've made for the last 200 years. And our desire not to move from that course. So that's okay. I mean, it is what it is, but
But you have to have the data in order to present it back to say,
And this is-
here are our choices.
Mary's done an amazing job with the data. I mean, I giggle every time I get a spreadsheet. They're fabulous. They really are. But expenditures, I'm not gonna giggle, I'm gonna die.
All right, so that's the task force. Next item is, I think I've mentioned it to you before, but we are currently scheduled for a special town meeting for November 18th. I did read in last week's Clipper that there was some question on whether there would or would not be a special town meeting. All indications that I'm receiving from town administration is that we are proceeding forward with a special town meeting on the 18th of November with the primary purpose of meeting the requirements of the MBTA zoning,
Yeah.
which needs to be
So we're
done.
talking about down there.
Exactly, and so our deadline for all communities in the Commonwealth is to adopt or comply with the zoning requirements by the end of this calendar year, which is the impetus for having the special town meeting. I will tell you that it gives us the opportunity to also bring potentially some other articles in front of the town. Things like unpaid bills or other small housekeeping measures. So I anticipate.
Frank used to call it Christmas. It's every special town meeting, we go, "Oh, for Christ's sake, it's like Christmas for everything."
So, there is not a warrant that has been drafted yet, but the plan that, as I'm aware, is that we will still continue to. move
Well,
forward.
is the state still pushing for everybody to?
Yep.
Yeah.
Mhm, they are not backing down.
And if we don't,
So if we don't, then we run the risk of not being able to receive state grant funding. That's the stick
for
that they are.
everything,
Everything,
oh,
everything. And I will tell you that that will impact us dramatically.
Yeah.
We receive state grants and earmarks for a wide variety of purposes, across all departments. And if we were to lose that funding, that would dramatically impact our operations.
We got some choices to make.
If I could just interject what Mary is talking about. I grew up in the town of Milton, still have lots of very close friends, and they just went through a town vote to reject the MBTA requirement. And they're going through that process right now that Mary just described. It's going to have an impact. It will be consequential, and in particular with schools, school buildings, funding through those authorities that the Commonwealth controls. So Milton has not yet seen the results of that vote, but they're certainly getting the vibes. And I'm hearing from several people in that town that are in similar roles that we are, that it's going to have some rather unpleasant consequences.
I'll give you one example. This town has successfully applied for and received over the last several years a number of coastal zone management grants, and we are currently applying for a $3 million CZM coastal zone management grant in order to offset the cost of the seawall construction. We would be at risk of potentially not being able to receive grant awards of that magnitude. There is a very direct impact on our operation.
Well, and the PFAS stuff, that's gonna be heavily grant written, because this, I mean,
Well,
no, we don't think we're gonna get any grants on that?
I believe that we will get some. We're going to end up having to finance that using the state revolving fund, the SRF fund. We're trying to find grants that would be available, whether they're at the federal or state level. The federal government is pledging to make funding available for PFAS remediation, but it's going to be competitive, and it's going to be limited because this is a national problem.
And there's still talk at the very tippy top about, well, we'll go after the Monsantos and the DuPonts and the large corporations that have successfully.
Could I interject
Yes,
a comment on the PFAS just for a moment? There's a serious timing mismatch with PFAS. Number one, the local community, us, town residents, want a solution immediately. Number two, this is going to be an area of major litigation at the federal level, similar to the tobacco suit. And when I say there's a timing mismatch, the results of PFAS may not settle for several years. Inevitably, I expect there will be a settlement. I'm not a prognosticator of the future, but I would expect something in the billions of dollars that will be available. So the question is, how do you deal with the immediacy and the concern that people have today with the limited resources that we're going to have, with the information that the engineering firms are telling us that capping the wells is going to be an average cost of $1.5 million, and then inevitably what will likely be a positive result when it goes through all the litigation, but that's several years out. Those are the dilemmas that we face.
Yep, that is true.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right.
All right. Then looking ahead for setting up our fall meeting schedule, I just wanted to let this committee know that I have been in touch with the COA to book our schedule and reserve the large.
You are an overachiever this week.
And I set our schedule for Tuesday evenings going forward.
Oh, Thursdays.
And I'm eliminating Thursdays. And we will see how we do. I
With
firmly,
all due respect and love, you don't get to cancel a meeting if we don't agree to it. I mean, we need to discuss why that's gonna happen. I mean, I appreciate that the endeavor, but give us a little more color on this.
so, you guys work very swiftly. And we managed to get through a large amount of material, during the course of the FY 25 budget. Meeting twice a week is certainly a strain on me preparing for 2 meetings a week and having all of the materials twice a week as opposed to doing it once a week and then having the ability to go back and work on the items that you've asked about or asked for additional information. And I firmly believe that having one solid meeting a week, I think we'll be able to get through.
The only concern I have on
Our
that is
material.
when we go through with the departments. So there was a period of time where previous finance directors didn't want us to talk to the department heads. That was not that did not work. That was, it made the communication between the departments and the finance committee very stilted. And I think that the sense was, and I speak for myself and anybody else chime in, there were times I felt I was being told what I needed to know to do what people wanted me to do, not what we were charged to do. And that one did not sit well. So I don't see how we get everybody in to talk to us once a week unless we're there till 11 o'clock some nights, which is, you know,
No, thank you.
which has been a difficult, and I'm respectful of your time, you know that.
Yeah, I think that what I observed during the course of the process last year is we have department heads who have had longevity here with the community, and they are able to just through experience working with you guys present their budgets very swiftly. We had a number of new department heads who had to adapt to the process and work with the committee and understand what it was that you guys were looking for and make sure they come armed with information. Now they've been through that process, and I think that they will be able to get through that swiftly.
And so, and moving on from that to the articles, we had no articles of import last year. If indeed we have an override, it is going to be a very different story.
Then we will absolutely pivot. But the other thing too is that we were also hamstrung by not having ClearGov fully up to date, and that will change for this budget cycle.
Are we going to stick with that, ClearGov? I know you hate it.
I'd eliminate it. I love not having to work.
So what I find useful in ClearGov is the ability to add attachments, and you all have access to
Right.
that information without me having to email it and make sure everybody got it or have printed copies. So the ability to facilitate that data exchange and have notes on those line items that everybody can see and have additional information. That's a valuable component of that tool in my view. I also believe that it works very well for capital requests, because all of the departments have the ability to enter all of their capital requests and populate it with their quotes and other additional information, and we have one repository. I'm not juggling a lot of different things or waiting for a department to send me something so I can distribute it. They can attach it right there. So there is some value.
Yeah, there's a way it provides us with a little collaboration. So if I have a question about, you know, a budget, whatever, there's like almost an email kind of component to ClearGov that you can direct to the department head and respond to your question. I think it'll be challenging.
But there's certainly input time that you have to do that with ClearGov that you didn't have to do. And if we are going to use ClearGov, then I request a session of training so that
Okay.
we all are proficient with getting the information out of there that we need.
Fair enough. Sounds like a good idea.
I think a lot of the confusion around ClearGov, first of all, very busy. And if we had it set up in a way that it was clear to us what we were looking at without a lot of extraneous data that can come into the ClearGov, the view, it might be a lot more helpful because we will be distracted by things that are not of importance or not of relevance to us. So I think that's a really good suggestion, JR, that we get some solid training. And we have new folks on the committee and others that have just kind of hunted and pecked our way through ClearGov over the years and have changed, and there's been updates and enhancements to the system that be helpful to know. And maybe we can get somebody from ClearGov that might be able to help us and kind of give us some best in class tips about the best way to utilize. For a user, not for a finance director or for a financial staff, but as a person sitting on a lay person sitting and using it as you would.
Sounds like a great idea. I will organize a ClearGov training session with them. Great.
Just throw this out there. I believe all of us are on their distribution list, the ClearGov distribution list. And they do put out regular training sessions and resources. I know I've tapped into it before last year's budget season just to kind of to refamiliarize myself with some of the pieces, but there are some pretty nifty trainings that come through pretty regularly in there if you're looking to do it on your own too.
Yeah, really good point.
Excellent. Alrighty. So that's it for me. That's all I've got for you folks.
So what happens if we need extra meetings and we haven't booked the room?
Then we have them.
Huh?
Then we have them. We're
So,
flexible.
no, you're flexible, but I'm saying Joanne.
Who else is out on Thursday night? Except us.
There's people here. I mean, I'm just saying, I don't want, I can't say I'm 100% comfortable with just, especially during certain portions of it, yes. But after the first of the year and going through all the articles, having department heads come back. And if we end up with an override, no, I think that I've seen this crowd after 10 o'clock at night and it's not pretty.
It's not sustainable for a long days, although I may find different.
Yeah, you can take a nap.
I
But
I hear
it's,
you.
yeah, I think
It was a
that,
long day for Mary.
I think we're gonna have to see how it goes. I'm not on the record. I am not just agreeing that, oh, cool, let's just meet once a week. No.
I think on October, November, December, the once a week is gonna work. But
Yep, it
after
could be,
that,
yes.
we're gonna have to bear down.
Yeah.
Which we did, and we canceled a lot of meetings too, which was fine. I mean, I don't wanna have a meeting if I don't have to be there just for.
It was under your purview and it was,
You know me, I have control issues.
Did you not say that out loud?
Yeah, so I read it in your eyes. I read it in your eyes. I know.
Whatever it is, we'll get it done.
Yeah,
Just have to be
right.
flexible.
I mean, is this building that busy that you can't get a meeting?
Yes. Very good. day.
Really?
Yeah.
Beautiful. Lots of people want me.
Yeah.
We'll make it work.
Yeah.
We can be
But
flexible.
usually on a snowy Tuesday, Thursday night, there's not a lot of people hanging out. Except the finance committee.
No, that's true. I mean, all I could think of is though, if we did have an override, are we going to have to do two budgets, one with and one without?
Right.
I mean, this stuff, there's a year that we did not, last year was an incredibly light year. Your first year, I know it didn't feel like it. But it
Yeah,
was an
it was.
incredibly light year. There were no hot articles. The budget was what it was. There wasn't anything really to debate. We didn't have huge adjustments in labor
Department heads
costs.
all knew that they couldn't get it anyway.
Right. So there
Was
really
there?
wasn't a lot of, you're absolutely right. There were a lot. That's why we canceled it so much. I don't know if that's gonna be the case. Okay.
I move for adjournment.
Yeah, let's go.
I second it.
I'm still tired. I gotta go to bed. So.
You need a
All
recovery.
those in favor?
Bye.
All right, thank you all for joining.